The Warrior in Chains. The Grand Throne Hall of the Valerian Empire was built to remind every visitor who ruled the stars. Tall black pillars reached toward a ceiling filled with moving constellations. Blue fire burned inside floating crystal spheres, lighting the polished floor with cold light. At the far end of the hall stood the silver throne, raised high above the court. Princess Elira Valen sat upon it with calm confidence. She was young, powerful, and admired by her people. And her silver armor reflected the light like polished glass, and a long white cloak flowed down the steps of the throne. Around her stood generals, nobles, and fleet commanders, all watching today's event. A human had been captured. The great doors of the hall opened slowly with a deep metallic sound. 2 Imperial guards entered, holding energy chains attached to a single prisoner. The human walked forward without resistance. His armor was old and damaged. Burn marks covered the surface, and the metal was scratched and dented from many battles. He carried no visible weapon. No rank insignia decorated his chest. He looked tired but not broken. Whispers spread through the court. "That is the human warrior? He looks ordinary. This is the one who tried to resist our border fleet?" Princess Elira leaned slightly forward, studying him carefully. She had expected something more dramatic, a massive soldier, or a loud rebel commander. Instead, she saw a calm man in worn armor. The guards stopped in the center of the hall and forced the human to his knees. He did not struggle. He lifted his head slowly and looked directly toward the throne. There was no fear in his eyes. That detail annoyed her slightly. "So," Princess Elira began, her voice echoing clearly across the chamber, "this is the human who thought he could challenge the Valerian fleet." Soft laughter moved through the hall. "You attacked our patrol ships," she continued. "You delayed our expansion into the outer sector." The human did not answer. "Speak," she ordered. He looked at her calmly. "We defended our allies." The simplicity of the statement caused more laughter. "Defended," one general said loudly. "Humans barely survived the last Galactic War." "Yes," another noble added. "Your species almost disappeared." Princess Elira smiled faintly. "Tell me, human, what made you believe you could stop an empire?" The human's voice remained steady. I never tried to stop an empire." The court grew quieter. "What did you try to stop?" she asked. "A mistake." Murmurs moved across the chamber. Princess Elira tilted her head slightly. "You stand in chains, your fleet destroyed, and you speak of mistakes?" He did not react to the insult. She descended from her throne slowly, step by step, until she stood only a few meters from him. "You humans are interesting," she said softly. "You lose wars, you rebuild, you lose again, and yet you continue." She circled him slowly, examining his damaged armor. "Tell me your name," she demanded. He paused for a moment before answering. "No one important." The court laughed loudly at that. "Even your own species does not claim you?" she mocked. He did not respond. Princess Elira felt a strange irritation building. Most prisoners argued, most begged. This one did neither. She stepped closer and looked at his face more carefully. There was something familiar about it. Before she could think further, one of her senior generals shifted suddenly. General Varric, an older commander who had served during the last Galactic War, stepped forward slowly. His eyes were fixed on the human's face. The princess noticed his reaction immediately. "What is it, General?" she asked. Varric did not answer right away. He looked closer at the human, studying him as if searching through memory. The human remained silent. Varric's expression changed from confusion to recognition. "That cannot be," the general whispered quietly. The princess frowned. "Speak clearly." Varric swallowed slowly. "Your Highness, I have seen this man before." Soft murmurs filled the hall. "When?" she demanded. "During the final year of the Galactic War." The hall fell silent. Princess Elira turned back toward the human. "You fought in that war?" "Yes," he answered calmly. "On the front lines?" she asked. "No." "Then where?" He looked at her steadily. "In the shadows." The general's breathing became heavier. "Your Highness, if I am correct..." "Correct about what?" she demanded sharply. Varric's voice lowered. "He is not just a soldier." The princess stared at the human again, searching his face for truth. The Galactic War had ended suddenly, unexpectedly. Multiple empires collapsed at once. Records were sealed, strategies classified. Rumors spread about a human strategist who turned enemies against each other and forced peace without total conquest. But that name had disappeared from official history. Princess Elira stepped closer, her voice colder now. "Tell me," she said slowly, "were you part of the war's end?" The human met her gaze without fear. "Yes." The hall went completely silent. General Varric whispered, barely audible. "He ended it." Princess Elira felt a sudden chill run through her thoughts, as she had just mocked a chained human warrior, not knowing he had already ended a galactic war. The name that was buried. The silence inside the Grand Throne Hall felt heavier than iron. Moments earlier, nobles had laughed at the chained human kneeling on the polished floor. Now, no one moved. No one whispered. Every eye shifted between the calm prisoner and General Varric, whose expression had changed from recognition to unease. Princess Elira stood very still. "He ended it," Varric had said, and she did not like uncertainty in her court. "Explain yourself," she ordered sharply. General Varric stepped forward, his armor echoing softly with each step. He kept his gaze fixed on the human. "During the final phase of the Galactic War, coalition forces collapsed in less than 3 months. Entire battlefronts dissolved without major fleet engagements. Supply chains failed. Alliances turned against one another. It was not brute force. It was strategy." Murmurs began spreading quietly through the nobles. Princess Elira narrowed her eyes. "We studied those campaigns. It was internal corruption within the coalition." "Yes," Varric replied carefully, "but someone triggered it." The human remained on his knees, chains glowing faintly around his wrists. He showed no sign of pride, no desire to interrupt. Elira looked directly at him. "Stand." The guards hesitated for a fraction of a second before helping him to his feet. The energy chains remained active, but she wanted him upright. "You claim you ended the war," she said. "I said I was part of its end," he corrected calmly. "That war reshaped half the galaxy," she continued. "Entire empires disappeared." "Yes. You were a soldier." "Yes. That makes no sense." He did not answer immediately. General Varric spoke instead. "Your Highness, in classified war briefings, there was mention of a human operative, a strategist who infiltrated coalition networks. He predicted alliance fractures before they happened. He manipulated resource routes. He exposed hidden distrust among rival leaders." The princess turned sharply. "I was never informed of this." "It was considered rumor," Varric admitted, "and then the records were sealed." Elira stepped closer to the human until only a small distance remained between them. "What was your role?" she demanded. He looked at her steadily. "I studied patterns," he said. "That is not an answer." "It is the only one that matters." The nobles exchanged confused glances. "You studied patterns?" she repeated. "Yes. Patterns of fear, patterns of ambition, patterns of supply movement and political tension." "And that ended the war?" she asked. "No," he replied calmly. "Their reactions did. The hall grew quiet again. Elira tried to understand what he implied. Well, you are saying you did not destroy fleets? No. You did not assassinate leaders? No. Then what did you do? I showed them the consequences of continuing. The sentence settled across the chamber like a slow wave. General Varric nodded faintly. Coalition leaders began distrusting one another during that period. Secret communications were leaked. Resource stockpiles were exposed. Minor factions switched sides without warning. The princess's expression darkened slightly. You created instability. No, the human corrected again. I revealed it. The distinction made her pause. He continued, his tone steady and simple. The coalition believed strength alone would win the war. They ignored weaknesses within their structure. I did not attack their fleets. I mapped their fractures. Elira studied him closely now. This was not the language of a battlefield brute. This was controlled, analytical speech. You expect me to believe, she said slowly, that a single human caused empires to collapse without firing a weapon? No, he answered. I expect you to understand that empires collapse when they ignore internal strain. Her mind moved quickly. Her own expansion into the outer sector had stretched supply lines thin. Political pressure had risen in distant colonies. She had dismissed those concerns as temporary. General Varric spoke again, quieter this time. When the war ended, coalition leaders signed peace within days, and it was as if they feared something worse than defeat. Princess Elira looked back at the human. What did they fear? She asked. He held her gaze. Exposure. The word carried weight. Exposure of what? She pressed. The fact that their strength was illusion, he replied. The hall grew colder somehow. Elira felt irritation building again, but this time it was mixed with caution. And now you stand in my court, claiming you ended that war. Why reveal yourself? I did not reveal myself, he said calmly. Your general recognized me. General Varric's eyes remained fixed on the human. You disappeared after the war ended, he said quietly. Yes. Why? Because peace does not need applause. That statement silenced the last whispers in the chamber. Princess Elira crossed her arms, thinking carefully. If you ended the Galactic War, she said, why attack my patrol fleet? We did not attack first, he replied. We responded. You delayed our expansion. Yes. Why? Because expansion without stability repeats history. The princess felt a subtle chill. You are suggesting my empire risks repeating the coalition's collapse. I am suggesting you are following the same pattern. The directness of the statement caused several nobles to tense visibly. Elira stepped closer, her voice lowering but growing sharper. You are a prisoner in my hall. Choose your words carefully. He did not flinch. I always do. The calm confidence in his tone unsettled her more than defiance would have. She glanced at General Varric. Are you certain this is the same strategist? Varric nodded slowly. The face has aged, but the eyes are the same. Princess Elira turned back to the human one more time. If what you say is true, she said carefully, then you are not just a warrior. No, he replied. Then what are you? He answered without hesitation. Knights, I am someone who has seen what pride does to empires. The words echoed through the chamber. Moments earlier, she had mocked him in chains. Now she understood something unsettling. She had not captured a simple human soldier. She had captured the man who ended a galactic war without firing a single shot. And for the first time since he entered her hall, Princess Elira felt something unfamiliar. Concern. The game of power. The atmosphere in the grand throne hall had shifted completely. The initial laughter and mockery had been replaced with quiet reflection. Princess Elira stood in front of the human warrior, the weight of the conversation hanging heavily in the air. She had expected this encounter to end with her showcasing the might of her empire, but instead, she found herself questioning the very foundation of her rule. The human had not come to her with threats, weapons, or even defiance. He had come with knowledge of her empire's vulnerabilities, the knowledge of the mistakes that could lead to its downfall. Elira moved away from the human, walking slowly toward the large holographic map displayed at the far end of the hall. The map detailed the vast borders of the Valerian Empire, its trade routes, military outposts, and colonized worlds. It was an impressive display of power, but now, with the human's words echoing in her mind, it suddenly felt fragile. He had shown her how easy it would be for the Empire to lose its grip if it continued down a path of unchecked pride. The human spoke again, his voice calm, breaking the silence. "You can build all the empires you want, but they will crumble if you don't learn how to sustain them." His words were blunt, but they cut through her thoughts like a sharpened blade. Elira turned to face him. "What do you expect from me now?" she asked, her voice sharp but laced with curiosity. "Do you expect me to bow to you for the wisdom you've given me?" He looked at her with unwavering eyes. "I do not expect anything," he replied. "I simply want you to see the truth. You can choose to ignore it, but that would only make the fall harder." The princess could feel the heat of her pride rising. She had been raised to believe in the supremacy of her empire. The Valerians were the greatest force in the galaxy, their ships and armies unmatched. But here was a human who had seen through her empire's veneer, who had exposed the cracks without firing a single shot. It was humiliating, yet strangely liberating. "You think you know everything?" Elira said, her tone cold. "You think you understand how empires work?" "I understand what brings them down," he replied. "That's the difference." She couldn't deny the truth in his words. Every empire, no matter how powerful, eventually faced challenges that could undo it. See, even the mighty Valerian Dominion was not immune to the forces of corruption, complacency, and internal weakness. She had spent her life building an image of invincibility, but the reality was far more fragile than she had ever admitted. "What would you have me do?" Elira asked, her voice softer now. She was no longer the confident princess who expected to conquer her enemies with strength. She was a leader who had just learned that her empire's strength was built on sand, not solid ground. And the human stood tall, his expression unchanged. "Start by recognizing your weaknesses. Stop expanding blindly and focus on building stability within. Strength is not about conquering the galaxy. It's about maintaining what you already have." Elira's mind raced. His words were like a revelation. She had always viewed the Valerian Empire's power as a weapon to be used against others, but now she saw that true strength lay in something different. It lay in control, in restraint, in knowing when to fight and when to yield. The idea that she could choose peace, that she could focus on internal growth rather than external conquest, was foreign to her. But it felt right. "Tell me more about how your people managed to survive the war," Elira said, moving toward him. She was no longer asking in the tone of a ruler interrogating a prisoner. She was asking in the voice of a leader seeking guidance. The human warrior didn't hesitate. "We didn't win through sheer force. We won by being flexible, by adapting to circumstances, by knowing when to retreat and when to strike. We learned from our mistakes and prepared for the worst. That's why we survived." Elira absorbed his words carefully. For the first time, she felt a sense of humility that had eluded her throughout her reign. She had never considered that her empire could be fragile, that its strength could one day lead to its undoing. But this human, who she had once mocked and underestimated, had shown her a different path, a path where strength was measured not by dominance, but by foresight and strategy. "You think your way will work for us?" she asked, still unsure. "I know it will," he replied, "but it's up to you to decide if you're willing to change." There was silence between them for a long moment as the weight of his words settled in. Elira felt the full force of his statement, and for the first time she felt a crack in her arrogance. And perhaps the Valerian Empire's greatest strength had always been its ability to learn from its failures, not just its victories. Finally, Princess Elira spoke again, her voice soft but firm. "What if I choose to follow this path? What if I choose to change?" The human warrior looked at her, his gaze steady and unflinching. "Then you will lead an empire that will endure, not because of its power, but because of its wisdom." Elira nodded slowly. She was no longer the same ruler who had entered this hall moments ago. The weight of the human's words had shifted something inside her. She had always believed that power was defined by the strength of one's army, but now she saw that true power came from understanding. It came from knowing when to fight and when to let go, when to expand and when to focus inward. For the first time, Princess Elira understood the full meaning of strength. It was not about force. It was about balance. And with that realization, the direction of her empire began to shift. As the human was escorted out of the hall, the princess watched him leave with a sense of quiet respect. She had not expected to learn from him. She had not expected to be humbled by a human warrior. But in that moment, she realized that sometimes the greatest leaders are the ones who can recognize when they have been wrong and who have the strength to change. The Galactic War may have ended, but the real battle for the future had only just begun. The change that came. 2 late weeks passed since the encounter in the Grand Throne Hall, and Princess Elira found herself deeply changed. Her advisors had noticed her shift in behavior, and although they tried to remain diplomatic, they couldn't hide their curiosity. Where once she had spoken with absolute confidence, demanding loyalty and obedience from all who served her, now she took time to listen more carefully, to weigh her options before making decisions. She studied the maps of her empire more closely, reviewing old records of past conflicts, and spending more time with her generals in private meetings. Her decisions, once immediate and often based on sheer pride, now felt more measured, and it wasn't just in the court. Elira began to see the cracks in her empire more clearly. The aggressive expansion she had pursued for years had left them stretched thin across the galaxy, with numerous small, rebellious systems simmering on the edge of full revolt. The economic strain of constant war and the toll it took on her people had been ignored for too long. The demands of maintaining a vast empire required something more than just strength. It required wisdom. One evening, while she sat alone in her chamber, looking out over the sprawling city below, Elira couldn't help but think of the human warrior's words. "Strength is not about conquest. It's about maintaining what you already have." How had she missed this? The empire she had been so determined to build, to conquer, had already begun to crumble beneath the weight of its own ambition. She had built her power on military might, but the human had shown her a far more sustainable path, one that didn't rely on domination, but on stability and understanding. As Elira stood before a holographic map of her empire, the weight of what needed to be done became clear. She had been so focused on victory after victory, expanding the borders of the Valerian Dominion, that she had forgotten what made those victories meaningful in the first place. The people who lived within those borders. She had never truly asked them if they wanted to expand or if they were willing to pay the price for the imperial vision she had imposed upon them. She called for a private council meeting the following day, gathering her top generals, strategists, and advisors. And they gathered around a large circular table in the war room, the air heavy with the unspoken tension. They had all seen her transformation, and some of them feared that this shift in thinking would weaken the empire. They were loyal to her, but they had been bred to believe that power and strength came from domination, not from dialogue. "Your Highness," one of the senior generals began, his voice steady but filled with uncertainty, "I trust that you have reconsidered your stance. Oh, but the reality is that the empire is built on conquest. Our enemies grow bolder, and we must remain vigilant." Elira met his gaze, her eyes sharp but thoughtful. "I understand, General, but we can no longer afford to fight wars we do not need to win. Expansion for the sake of expansion is unsustainable. We must focus on the systems we already have, fortify our borders, strengthen our alliances, and maintain peace where it is possible." A murmur ran through the council. And the idea of reducing military aggression was unheard of among her most trusted officers. Elira could feel the hesitation, but she stood firm. "Do you think that the expansion of our empire has not cost us?" she asked quietly, her voice carrying across the table. "Our resources are stretched thin, our people are weary. We cannot continue this way." A strategist in the back of the room spoke up. "But, Your Highness, if we retreat now, what will be left of the empire? Or what will the galaxy think of us?" Elira's eyes grew colder, more resolute. "The galaxy will respect us more when we are seen as wise rulers, not just conquerors. We are not in a race to crush every power beneath our heels. True strength lies in stability, in knowing when to fight and when to step back." The room fell silent again, and for the first time in her life, Elira felt the weight of true leadership. Not the power to command, but the courage to change direction. That she had spent years building an empire with her fist, but now she realized that true power came from shaping a future that her people could support. She turned to the map, pointing to the outermost territories where rebellion simmered just beneath the surface. "We have made many enemies because we never asked what they wanted. We took what we thought we deserved, not what we could mutually benefit from. That ends now." The council shifted uneasily. Elira could see the doubt in their eyes. But there was something else, too. Curiosity. They had never seen her like this before. Calm, controlled, but unwavering in her resolve. She was no longer the princess of conquest. She was becoming something more. In the weeks that followed, Princess Elira began implementing the changes she had promised. She began peace talks with rival factions. She offered amnesty to smaller systems if they agreed to join the empire under more balanced terms. Military expansion was halted, and then resources were focused on strengthening the core of the empire. The changes were not universally accepted. There were whispers of weakness. Many generals were unsure about the new path, but Elira remained steadfast. She knew that true power was not about showing strength in every battle. It was about building trust, not fear. But Elira did not stop there. She called for an official meeting with the human warrior, Commander Hayes, who had been the catalyst for her transformation. And she knew it was time to learn from him directly. When he entered the royal chamber, there was no formality, no fanfare. He was a warrior, not a diplomat, but she treated him with the respect he had earned. "I've done what you suggested," she began. "I have changed the path of the empire. I've stopped the blind expansion." Commander Hayes nodded, but his expression remained neutral. "It's a difficult choice, Your Highness, but the right one." Elira met his gaze. "I wanted to ask you, then when you ended the Galactic War, did you ever think about what would come after?" He paused, the weight of his experience showing in his eyes. "Every time. War is never the solution. It's always just a start. It's what comes after that truly tests a leader." Elira nodded slowly. She now understood. Power was not about fighting wars. It was about knowing when to stop fighting and start building. She had finally learned what it truly meant to lead an empire. Or the price of change. As the months passed, Princess Elira continued to reshape her empire with a quiet, determined resolve. The changes she had initiated were not universally embraced. Many of her generals, raised in the tradition of domination and victory, found themselves torn between loyalty to their princess and loyalty to the empire's long-held ideals. In the royal chambers, the murmurs of discontent grew louder. The whispers about the weakened empire, and about the risks of diplomacy instead of force, began to circulate. But Elira had anticipated this resistance. She knew that changing the course of an empire was never a simple matter. It required more than just policy shifts. It required the transformation of the hearts and minds of its people. Princess Elira's first test came with the announcement of the new peace talks with the rival factions along the outer borders. And her decision to halt the empire's military expansion and focus on diplomatic channels was met with fierce opposition from her most senior officers. The proposal to grant amnesty and autonomy to systems that had long been viewed as rebellious or even as enemies was seen as a grave mistake. Some called it an act of weakness, others as an abandonment of the empire's long-standing principle of conquest. In her private chambers, Elira spent long hours weighing the consequences. She knew she could not please everyone, but she also knew that if she allowed fear and pride to govern her decisions, she would repeat the mistakes of the past. As the first peace negotiations began, Elira joined the delegation that would meet with the leaders of the rebellious systems. The tension in the room was palpable as the representatives of both sides gathered around the table. Elira, dressed in simple but regal attire, stood at the head of the table, at the weight of leadership heavier on her shoulders than ever before. She addressed the leaders of the outer systems with the calm confidence that had begun to define her reign. "The empire you once feared is no longer the same," she began, her voice steady but full of conviction. "We are not here to demand your surrender. We are here to offer cooperation and mutual respect." The response from the representatives of the rebellious systems was cautious but receptive. They had heard of the changes within the Dominion, of the princess who had chosen diplomacy over destruction. It was not a choice they had expected from a leader who had once shown only the strength of her military might. Elira's words, simple yet powerful, resonated with the leaders who had long sought peace but had seen no opportunity for it. They agreed to the terms, but with hesitation, unsure of the true nature of Elira's commitment to this new vision. Days later, a word spread throughout the empire that the first steps toward peace had been taken. The negotiations had yielded results. But instead of a grand celebration, there was a hushed silence. Some saw this as a victory, while others saw it as a dangerous compromise. Elira spent the following weeks speaking with her military commanders, reassuring them that this was not a sign of weakness, but a necessary evolution. She reminded them that the empire's strength lay in its ability to adapt, to face challenges with intelligence and foresight, not just brute force. Yet, the seeds of doubt had been planted, and not all of her officers were willing to let go of their old ways. The true cost of her decision to change was becoming clear. The very foundations of the empire's power were shifting beneath her. Elira had chosen a path that would lead to a more balanced, stable empire, but not without sacrifices. The immediate satisfaction of victory through force had given way to the slow and sometimes painful work of building lasting peace. She could see the potential for growth and stability, but she could also see the cracks in the loyalty of her military leaders. At the same time, Elira began to see the fruits of her decision. As the peace talks progressed and the agreements began to take shape, new trade routes were established. Relations with the rebellious factions improved, and systems that had once been hostile were now cooperating with the Dominion. And Elira's decision to focus on internal stability began to bear fruit. But with these successes came the realization that change was not easy. There were always those who resisted, those who clung to the old ways, and those who feared that peace would lead to weakness. One evening, Elira met with General Varric, her trusted advisor, in the quiet of the royal gardens. The stars above were reflected in the calm waters of the fountain as they sat across from each other. And Varric's face was lined with years of service, his eyes tired but respectful. "Your Highness," he began, "I have served you loyally, but I must ask, what if this peace you seek is the beginning of the end? What if they see this as an opportunity to rise against us again?" Elira looked at him, her gaze steady. "If they rise against us, General, we will be ready, but we will not provoke war unnecessarily. If our strength is to endure, it must be built on respect, not fear. We have spent too long growing through conquest. It is time to grow through cooperation." Varric studied her for a moment before nodding slowly. "I hope you are right, Your Highness, but I fear that not all of our people will accept this new path." Elira placed a hand on the table, feeling the weight of her decision settle into her bones. Change is never easy, but it is the only way forward. If we continue to act as we always have, we will continue to repeat the same mistakes. I would rather lead with wisdom, even if it costs me some of my power, than continue down a path that will destroy everything we've built." Varric remained silent for a long moment before finally nodding. "You are right, Your Highness, but know that I will stand with you, no matter what happens." Elira smiled, a faint, tired smile. "Thank you, General. Your loyalty means more than you know." As the night grew colder, Elira stood up and looked out over the gardens, and the stars seemed to shine brighter than before. She had chosen a path of peace, but it had come at a cost. She had chosen change, but it had not been easy. The empire she had once known was no more. In its place, a new empire was emerging, one built on the principles of understanding, stability, and mutual respect. It would take time for it to fully take root, but Elira was determined to see it through, no matter the challenges ahead. Her journey had only just begun, but she knew that this was the only way forward. And for the first time in her life, Princess Elira felt the weight of leadership not as a burden, but as a responsibility she was ready to bear. The war that almost returned. The peace Princess Elira had built was not fragile, but it was not yet secure. Stability had begun to take root along the outer sectors. Trade routes were flowing more smoothly, and the tension between the Dominion and neighboring systems had reduced. However, empires do not change without resistance. While Elira worked to strengthen alliances and rebuild trust, there were those within her own ranks who believed she had gone too far. Several high-ranking admirals quietly disagreed with her reforms. They believed the Valerian Empire had risen to power through strength and fear. To them, diplomacy signaled hesitation, and hesitation in their minds invited rebellion. Though they remained publicly loyal, and private communications between certain fleet commanders revealed growing unrest. Commander Hayes remained within Dominion territory as an official diplomatic advisor during this transition. He did not interfere directly in policy, but he observed carefully. He recognized the signs. Internal opposition often rises when external conflict disappears. A system accustomed to war struggles with peace. One evening, urgent alerts reached the palace command center. So the Dominion fleet group stationed near the border of a former rebellious sector had mobilized without royal authorization. Ships were moving aggressively toward a neutral system that had recently signed cooperation treaties with Elira. Princess Elira immediately entered the war chamber. The holographic map displayed multiple Valerian cruisers advancing in tight formation. "Who authorized this?" she demanded sharply. A nervous communications officer responded, "Admiral Corveth claims defensive precaution due to suspicious activity." Elira's eyes narrowed. There had been no confirmed hostile movement, General Varric stepped beside her. "This is not defensive positioning," he said quietly. "It is a display of dominance." Elira understood instantly. If those ships entered neutral territory aggressively, months of diplomatic progress would collapse. Trust would fracture. The very scenario Commander Hayes had warned her about would unfold. "Adi, open direct channel to Admiral Corveth," she ordered. Moments later, the Admiral's holographic image appeared above the command table. He stood tall, his expression composed but firm. "Your Highness," he said respectfully, though tension lingered beneath his tone, "our presence ensures control." "It ensures fear," Elira replied calmly. "With respect, fear built this empire." "And fear nearly destroyed others," she countered sharply. The Admiral hesitated. "Peace is fragile. Now we must remind them of our strength." "Our strength does not require reminders," Elira answered. Silence followed. Commander Hayes, standing quietly to the side, observed the exchange without interruption. This was Elira's test, not his. "Return the fleet to defensive formation immediately," Elira commanded. Admiral Corveth stiffened slightly. "Your Highness, that will appear weak." Elira's voice grew colder, but controlled. "No. It will appear disciplined." There was a long pause before the Admiral responded. "Yes, Your Highness." The fleet formations on the holographic map shifted gradually, pulling back from the neutral system's space. Tension in the chamber eased slightly. When the channel closed, General Varric exhaled quietly. "You prevented escalation." "For now," Elira said. Commander Hayes finally spoke. "Internal resistance is expected." She glanced toward him. You predicted this?" "Yes, because peace disrupts old power structures," she said thoughtfully. "Yes." Elira stepped away from the command table and looked at the star map. "I have changed direction," she said quietly. "But I have not changed everyone's mindset." Hayes nodded. "Change must survive its first test." She turned toward him. "And if Admiral Corveth refuses next time?" "Then you decide whether your reforms are symbolic or permanent," he answered. And the weight of that statement settled heavily in her mind. In the days that followed, Elira initiated a full review of military command structures. Officers resistant to strategic reforms were reassigned or placed under evaluation. This was not an act of punishment. It was stabilization. She understood now that reform without structural alignment would collapse under pressure. At the same time, she addressed the Dominion publicly. Standing before her people in the Grand Throne Hall, where she had once mocked a chained human warrior, she spoke clearly and directly. "Strength does not mean constant aggression," she declared. "It means control. We will not start wars to prove our power. Our power is proven by endurance." The hall listened in complete silence. "The Valerian Empire will not fall to pride," she continued. "We will adapt. We will grow through stability." Her words echoed across the chamber. And some officers remained skeptical, but many felt the shift. The Empire was not becoming weaker. It was becoming more focused. Later that evening, she met privately with Commander Hayes. "The war almost returned," she said. "Yes," he replied. "And it came from within." "Yes." She studied him carefully. "The Galactic War you ended, did it begin the same way?" He paused before answering. "Internal fear disguised as strength." She nodded slowly. The pattern was clearer now than ever before. You once stood in chains before me," she said quietly. "I mocked you without understanding your past." "Yes." "And now I see what you meant when you said empires collapse from internal strain?" "Yes." She looked out over the illuminated city skyline beyond her palace walls. Trade ships moved steadily between docking platforms. Civilian lights flickered across distant towers. "I will not allow my empire to repeat that history," she said firmly. Commander Hayes inclined his head slightly. Then your empire may endure." In that moment, Princess Elira understood the true meaning of power. It was not conquering every system within reach. It was resisting the urge to prove strength when discipline served better. The war that could have reignited across the stars had been stopped before it began, not by weapons, not by threats, but by choice. The legacy of the warrior. She mocked years passed after the night when Princess Elira stopped her own fleet from starting another war. And the Valerian Empire did not collapse. It did not weaken. Instead, it changed. Slowly, carefully, and with resistance at times, but it changed. The outer sectors that once feared imperial fleets began to trade openly. Border worlds that had prepared for rebellion now invested in shared infrastructure. Joint security agreements reduced piracy and unrest. Stability, once dismissed as softness, became the new symbol of strength. Princess Elira was no longer known only as a ruler of conquest. But across diplomatic channels and distant systems, she gained a different title, the Sovereign of Balance. It was not a name given in fear, but in respect. She did not erase the empire's military power. She refined it. Fleet formations became defensive guardians instead of aggressive signals. Resources were redirected from expansion campaigns into technological development, education, and internal security reforms. The Dominion did not shrink. It matured. Commander Hayes remained for a time as a strategic advisor before returning to human space. He never sought recognition within the Valerian Empire. He attended no parades and accepted no medals. His mission had never been about glory. It had been about prevention. Before his departure, Princess Elira requested one final private meeting in the same throne hall where their story had begun. The hall looked different to her now. She remembered standing above him, mocking him while he knelt in chains. She remembered the laughter of her court. She remembered the moment General Varric whispered that he had ended a galactic war. That memory no longer embarrassed her. It reminded her of the moment her leadership began to evolve. "You once stood here as my prisoner," she said quietly, as they faced one another in the empty hall. "I misjudged you." "You judged what you saw," Hayes replied calmly. "And I saw only armor and chains," she continued. "Not experience," he remained silent. "You ended a war without conquest," she said. "You stopped another without firing a shot. That kind of power is rare." "It is not power," he answered. "It is pattern recognition." She allowed a faint smile. "You reduce everything to simple terms." "Complex systems fail when leaders ignore simple truths," he replied. She walked slowly across the hall, her footsteps echoing softly. "When I mocked you, I believed strength required dominance. I believed fear ensured control." "And now?" he asked. "Now I understand that fear creates enemies faster than it creates loyalty," she said. He inclined his head slightly, acknowledging her growth without praise. "Will your empire continue this path?" he asked. "Yes," she answered firmly. "It must." Outside the palace, life in the capital moved steadily. Trade vessels launched and landed in balanced cycles. The military maintained readiness without aggressive posturing. Former rival systems now sent representatives to collaborative councils. The change was not dramatic or flashy. It was structural and steady. As Hayes prepared to depart the Dominion permanently, Princess Elira stood on the upper balcony overlooking the docking platforms. His transport vessel lifted quietly into the sky without ceremony. She watched until it disappeared among the stars. General Varric stepped beside her. "He changed this empire," the old general said thoughtfully. "No," Elira replied softly. "He forced me to see it differently. The choice was still mine." Varric nodded slowly. Many rulers never reach that point. Elira looked out across the skyline, where lights from millions of citizens glowed against the night. "Strength is not about avoiding mistakes," she said quietly. "It is about learning before they become fatal." News of the Valerian reforms spread across neighboring powers. Some empires mocked the Dominion at first, predicting weakness. But as cycles passed and stability endured, those same powers adjusted their tone. The Dominion was no longer feared for reckless expansion. It was respected for measured discipline. In human space, Commander Hayes returned to quiet service within strategic planning divisions. His name remained largely classified. Those who knew his history understood his impact, but he preferred obscurity. Peace, in his view, did not require a monument. Back within the Valerian Empire, the young cadets studied the period known as the Recalibration Era. They learned about the near war that was prevented, about the internal resistance that nearly triggered escalation, and about the moment a princess chose restraint over pride. They were taught that dominance without discipline leads to collapse, and they were told a story about the day an alien princess mocked a human warrior in chains, not knowing he had already ended a galactic war, so not knowing he would prevent another, not knowing that the quiet man before her carried no weapon at all, only foresight. Princess Elira never forgot that first meeting. It remained a reminder that leadership is not proven by humiliation of the weak, but by recognition of wisdom, even when it arrives from an unexpected source. She had once laughed at a chained human. In time, and she realized she had been standing before one of the most dangerous minds in the galaxy, not because he sought destruction, but because he understood consequence. And because of that understanding, the stars remained quiet, not silent from fear, but quiet from stability.